Good morning. Eddie G's Music World is back for another show. It is February 25th, 2019. Everything is fine. Medical things done. I survived. Miserable, but I'm here. We're trying to deal with horrible freezing outside, snowstorms, freezing, can't walk, falling down. It's an absolute nightmare where I live. We just bought 3 bags of salt and 2 bags of sand just for my driveway walkway stairs. Everybody's falling or almost falling or slipping. It's nothing can be done. You just have to wait till it melts, but it's a slow process. We're going to take a break from the last 2 shows, which was poems and lyrics. I was happy to see some editor was nice enough to look at it and say he appreciated that I put the time in for those things. I should have written his name down. I didn't, but he mentioned it on one of the comments sections, so thank you to him, and I'll remember your name next time, I promise. Today, we're going to do a Heart retrospective on Heart. It's because they're reformed. As most people know, it's based on 2 sisters, Ann and Nancy Wilson. There have been guitarists coming in and out, drummers, but as long as those 2 girls are there, they cover, the most key elements of the band. So what happened was there was a breakup between these sisters. As far as I know, they both have adopted or have had surrogate produced children. And if I remember correctly, Nancy was with one of her kids, and Anne had either screamed at him or pushed him, or something created a fight between those 2 sisters. I believe Nancy was not happy the way Anne was dealing with one of her children. Like I say, it could have been a shove, a push, a pull, a comment, I'm not sure. And that was a year or 2 of them not talking, and obviously if they're not talking, they're not working together. But they have announced a tour. They are coming back to Montreal in June, I believe. If I was more mobile and apt to run around more, which I'm less apt to run around now, I would go see them a 3rd time, but I have seen them twice, and as much as they are a great band, I'm pretty sure I'm going to resist another visit seeing them live, but that's nothing to do with their talent. Here, I'll go back in time and just give you notes that I've taken and stories about them that I found important. When they first started, there was a lot of negativity, rumors about the sisters, like sexual stuff. People were making comments that they were lesbian sisters. It was a very dramatic band. A lot of stress went into this group. They really did not. They started off with great intentions, but there was a lot of back and forth with relationships. There was a love triangle. For example, one sister, her boyfriend was one brother, and the other sister had another thing. It was Michael Fisher was one brother, and Roger Fisher was the other brother. So I'm trying to remember which one was which, but it's not overly important. But one was with one brother, one was with the other. And early on, there were other members at the beginning of the band. Howard Leese was a guitarist. Scott Fassen played bass. And the guitar was Roger Fisher, and Mike Fisher was the drummer. So the father and mother, they kind of one of these army families where they would move around, and they settled in the late 60s, in early 60s actually, in Seattle, Washington. And this is where they were kids growing up. Anne used to actually stutter when she was a small child, and she learned that the singing kind of got her over that, because she had an affinity for singing, and when she sang, she didn't stutter. Okay, here we have it here. Anne was with Michael Fisher, and Roger Fisher was with Nancy. So that was okay when they were all together and having a harmonious relationships, but things went bad early on in the career. There was some because of the lesbian rumors, some record executive said, "Hey, you're still getting it on with your sister." He told Ann Wilson this, and of course Ann was insulted by it and thought about the guy that said it to her and wrote the song Barracuda about the guy. Maybe she just got the impression that he was a slime ball, and Barracuda is kind of a fish that goes around attacking people, and I guess that was the connection there. So there we have it. We got the first incarnations of the band in Seattle. I know that Ann quit early on to be with Michael Fisher. And then the two of them went to Vancouver. I think Ann and Michael went to Vancouver, or maybe the whole band did, and then they went. Anyway, the band went to Vancouver, and then at some point, Ann and Michael, they left Heart, but then they eventually ended up in Vancouver with them. The song Magic Man was written about Michael Fisher, one of the brothers. So, because, if you listen to the words, you hear on the phone, her mother is mad at her about something, and Anne is telling the mother that Michael is a magic man. Kind of a way to justify the relationship with the mother. And later on, Nancy went to college in Oregon. Then she went back to Heart. So all of them went to Vancouver. Then Nancy's the one that left as well. So she went to school, I believe. Yeah, college. So this was like a tumultuous beginning. The band wasn't making money at the time, so obviously it's not shocking that they were together, but then there were issues and didn't start out great. And then Roger Fisher, he might have ended up with Nancy. Yeah, he did. I know they had a thing with Mushroom Records fighting with the band because I think they had put stuff out and they kind of had fights with the group. And at the beginning stages of the group, it also was I think they tried to make the band out to be very like making rumors about the two sisters and everything, and it didn't work out that great. They quit the label, but what happened was they owned the rights to the next album or two, and they kind of because it was a bit of a success, they kind of took other recordings and put out another album or so. Against the better interest of the band. They didn't appreciate it because they had already left, and then they ended up with I believe, I don't have these things exactly in chronological order, but they left, I think might have been Epic Records. So I know they had a big break where they were working in a small bar and making peanuts, and the band, they got fired from the bar. And then they got a call that somehow their manager got them to an opening gig for Rod Stewart in Montreal, which I wish I would have been at that one. I did see both bands, but not together. It had something to do with the fact that CHOM, which is the Montreal radio station, which I listened to quite a bit growing up, but not anymore. Even though the number one announcer seems to be friendly with me on Twitter, he's always replies to me and talks a little here and there with me, which is nice because he's a big deal in Montreal and he has time for people who communicate with him. Most people don't. So back then they were playing a lot of Heart songs on the radio. Before they even were big, they were playing in a bar for 20, 30 people for almost no money. And Montreal was playing their first record. So then when they got to Montreal and opened up for Rod Stewart, the crowd was into their music. So they were shocked. They didn't realize that in 1976 they actually had airplay, and Dreamboat Annie was like the first song that seemed to pick up a little popularity. I remember all these early songs from back then. I was in my teen years, and they did get quite a bit of airplay. So the battle was 2 years long with that Mushroom Records, and like I said, it was Epic. I see now that it was Epic Records that they ended up with in 1977, and that album was called Magazine, and Little Queen was on it. They also had a song Dog and Butterfly, very, very popular. But you see, this is why I call them a very dysfunctional band. But then again, most bands are. Like, look at Kiss. I mean, how much more dysfunctional can you get than those guys? But while their popularity was growing, they're in the middle of breaking up with each other. See, when you have a band that the core are involved with each other, plus another couple of guys that aren't, like there were two or three other guys that weren't involved with these sisters. So their relationships were falling apart. There was drugs, alcohol, cheating on each other, a lot of back and forth bad things happening. Things were happening that were typical of a band in trouble. I think I remember that Nancy, I think there was some, Roger Fisher was voted out of Heart. That was a big deal because he was an important guitarist, even though Nancy plays great guitar. And to a less extent, I saw live Anne was playing guitar too, but the last show was 5 years ago, but she wasn't the main guitarist. So it looks like Roger was gone, and then Nancy broke up with Michael, the other brother. I'm pretty sure he was gone at this time. I think he left too. It's pretty hard to, although Fleetwood Mac pulled it off for many years, pretty hard to continue with your ex-lover in the band that you're in. So at this point, we're at Baby Lestrange. That was the next album that came out. Then she's Michael Fisher, once that was over, she went with the drummer, Michael DeRosa, but they broke up too. So this is 3 breakups between the 2 sisters within the band. So somehow, through all of this insanity that was going on, the band never completely ended. They might have ended, but they were always like a period of flux, and then they came back. They had an album after that. I mean, they were producing hits at this point. 70s, late 70s, many hits were coming out. I don't need to tell you all of them. They were all pretty much known. 1981, there was Private Audition. This is when they got a little change of their look. Their hairstyles were changing. The record company was putting on them to look a little more 80s style instead of like hippie style, more modern new wave at the time, I guess, look. Steve Fasten, he was gone at this point. So his Leeds was still there. The Howard Leeds, the guitarist, was still there. It's a good thing he wasn't dating these 2 sisters, or he'd probably be gone too. Their albums were starting to slip a little bit. Early 80s, it was like there was a period of the attendance and the concerts were down. Records were not selling as well. Then they added new people, Mark Andes, Denny Camachi. Also, another album after that, Passion Works. I mean, all throughout this time, they had hits with Never and Alone. These were all huge songs. Then the album Passion Works, like I said, not that big too. It also was like maybe they couldn't make the 70s to early 80s transition all that well. Then Epic cut them. So they're in the early to mid 80s, and Epic has dropped them. Then Nancy, she meets Cameron Crowe, who was the writer in Almost Famous and other writing too. I forget all the work he's done, but he's very well respected in the business, and that was a marriage. They had kids, but again, it was a surrogate situation, I think, because I read up a little more about this. And I don't think either of these sisters have had children naturally. They've all been surrogates or adopted. Anne or Nancy. I had always thought that Nancy had them with Cameron Crowe, but apparently not. So there we go. We're moving on to the next record label, Capitol Records, and things seemed to turn around for them at that point. Never. That's when Never came out, which was huge. What About Love? These Dreams. These are all massive songs, got huge airplay. So they did have that 2, 3, 4 years where it was kind of sliding down. And then 1985, when I saw them the first time, I'm going to say it was around 85. Those songs had just come out, so it was a very good show. I mean, these were all big hits at the time on the air. And, you know, when you see a band when they're burning hot, they're not oldies band. Like now I see them. Like 5 years ago, I saw them. As great as they were, they're playing all their old songs. It wasn't currently, they weren't, you know, they had a new song or two, but it was, though, they didn't become really big hits at all. So this, I guess, this change of the way they looked and their, you know, their style was helping them. They got that fluffier hair and everything, but there was a backlash, of course. You know, Anne had a weight. She's always been a bit heavy, and not at the very beginning. She was kind of slim. If you look at old videos, in the 76 to 77 to 9 to 79 type of era, she's slim. She's always been a pretty girl. They both are. But by the early to mid-80s, she was definitely heavier, which when you're dealing with a band of attractive sisters, the record companies want to kind of make them look hot too to help sell, because at those days there was no Me Too movement. Just women were just told to, you know, as talented as they were, the way they looked was very important. Still is to some extent, of course. But they would shoot videos where Nancy was in the shot more, and they would shoot Anne from the head up because, you know, they didn't want to show a heavier woman, even though they put her in corsets and all kinds of ways to try to kind of keep your eye off the waistline type of thing. She had stage fright over it. It was a pretty dark time for her because she had originally had stage fright, and then she got over it when she became a big star. But then this negativity set in about Heart and with the weight and whatever, and made her a little uncomfortable. Panic attacks as well. So this is, here we are. We're trudging through the 80s, late 80s. Brigade came out, and that was a comeback. All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You from 1991. That was a big hit. It was a number 2 or 1, or I think it was close to one of those two numbers. And that was a comeback for them because it was maybe a couple of years since they really smashed out a song. And it was practically their, without looking into a detailed research, it was pretty much their last hit, unless there might have been a couple more that kind of drifted in around. There was some Tell It Like It Is, I think. And then, and I think Nancy did a song with Mike Reno from Loverboy. They did a duet. But overall, pretty much by the All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You era time, the hits were slowing down. More lineup changes. The kids were adopted by Ann Wilson. So they both became mothers in their own way. Then they had some kind of band, that side project, Love Mongers, but I can't tell you any music by them. I never looked into it heavily. Side projects generally are not, you know, they're, unless it's the Honey Drippers or something where it's Zeppelin or something. You know, like I think Phil Collins had a side project, and Springsteen has probably had a side project, and a lot of people do, but they generally are for fun, and they don't like top the charts or get airplay. Usually, there's exceptions, but that wasn't a big deal. Let's see what's next. She started to score some movies with her husband Cameron Crowe. I didn't write down which one, which they were. I think it was Almost Famous. Maybe it was one of them. and there was definitely others that she did the music for, one or two more. Then we go off to another breakup for Aunt Nancy Wilson. These marriages that don't last and the relationships don't last. Somebody named Jeff Bywater, who was in the movie industry as some director, producer, behind the scenes type of guy. And that's the latest that I have on her relationships. And I'm not sure, from what I know, they're still together. Let me see. They weren't happy with Sarah Palin. She used Barracuda in her when they were campaigning with John McCain. So Sarah Palin used Barracuda, and that they didn't care for that. I mean, this goes on constantly. The Rolling Stones are fighting with. They don't like Trump using their music, but they haven't done much about it lately because I tweeted to Keith Richards, what happened to stopping Trump using your music? Like, you can't always get what you want to believe, and he didn't answer me. I mean, I guess when you're that popular, you don't want to hear from the lower hanging tweeters around the world that have advice for you. Like, whatever, maybe they don't care enough to get their lawyer out or send another letter to Trump. But I'm going to guess the Wilson sisters are not big fans of Trump, because most of these types, if they weren't fans of Palin, I'm going to assume they're not thrilled with Trump either. So that was the story that came out a few years ago, 2007 or 8, I guess. They got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 2013. A natural fit for them. ASCAP, Songwriters Award for the sisters, which is prestigious. I know that they wrote a lot together and by themselves and everything. So pretty much getting towards the end of this whole story about Heart. I know a few years back, well, I saw them in 2014. They were doing about 4 or 5 Led Zeppelin songs. And I can tell you right now that Ann Wilson can pull off Robert Plant without any problem. She's got his range, because he sings high, and she does too. And she can really belt it out. And when I saw them live in 2014, they had Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son, drumming. And it was a great combo. And it worked out great. I know they did Stairway and a few rock and roll and about 3 other songs. So I appreciated that. And she also did some live performance at the Royal Albert Hall, where the 3 Led Zeppelin surviving members were in the audience, and she sang Stairway and a couple of others maybe. And they all looked very impressed with her vocal ability. They were cutting to Robert Plant reacting to her, and he seemed to have a smile on his face. We know that Robert Plant doesn't want to sing those songs anymore, and he, that's his right. He's often doing his own thing with Alison Krauss, I think, and his own stuff. He did a Band of Joy I think at some point he got back with those guys for a song or two. If you're ever on YouTube and you got nothing to do, go back to 1968, 67, look for Robert Plant, Band of Joy. He was like a superior singer before he got to Led Zeppelin. I'm convinced that he would have been a massive star if he never joined Led Zeppelin, but it's impossible to be sure of that. But his talent was there. He had record deals. I mean, I don't think there was any major huge success with his solo pre-Zeppelin material or Band of Joy material, but the songs are amazing. So I found that they would stand up, and obviously he made a great move by joining Led Zeppelin and being their lead singer. So it's not like a mistake was made, but I'm thinking if he would have kept trying, there would have been success. And in Band of Joy was also John Bonham. So I remember reading a book about Led Zeppelin, and from what I heard, what I remember reading is that John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page went to a bar or a club, and they had heard that this Band of Joy was playing, and they had a great singer, and they were so blown away. They after the concert, they just sought him out and said, you gotta come to our new band we're forming. We have to have you, and that obviously worked out pretty well. During this this 2 to 3 or whatever year amount of time that Ann and Nancy were not talking, I know that Nancy was touring on her own because she opened up for Bob Seger a year and a half ago on his tour, and I came close to going to see Bob Seger, and it was in Rochester, New York, and it's another one of these shows that maybe I wish I went to, but unfortunately, I didn't feel like driving. My friend didn't feel like driving, and the guy who I almost hired to drive us wanted like $400 to take us there and back, so it was like kind of stupid. And then with the price of the tickets, were 100 and something each American. It was like getting close to $700 the whole thing, so we just decided to pack it in. And now he's touring again, but he's still coming very far away. He's still like Jones Beach, New York. You know, I like Bob Seger, but I tweeted him, "Can't you come to Montreal? You were here." I said to Bob Seger, "You were here in the early '80s." I looked it up, and look, I wish I would have went in the early '80s. Problem is, my friends back in those days were art rock guys only, and Bob Seger doing old time rock and roll. Excuse me, was a little too commercial for my snobby friends, and they didn't feel like going to that concert. And I probably said, "You want to go?" And then these 2 or 3 friends probably said no, or maybe just nobody said anything. And we just didn't go. And now I don't talk to any of those people. So, but I don't think I'm going to be going to see him. I don't see myself sitting in a car for 9 hours looking for Bob Seger each way. But the fight happened, and then now that they're back together, the tour is a reality. And go see them if you want to see a great show. Heart was a great band. Millions of records sold. There's one last thing I can mention. I did meet a guy in 1990. He was a guitarist from Alias. You can look them up. I Need You Now was their big song, More Than Words Can Say. And as I used to do and still do when I meet rock stars, I say, what bands were you in before? I always ask that. And if I ever get more interviews with rock musicians, I'll ask that of famous ones. And he said he played with Heart, but I looked it up and I couldn't find a record of this guy. But a lot of times, you know, maybe they tossed him in for a track or two over the years, or maybe he was like a third guitarist or did some guitar work on the live concerts, a few concerts. That's because I'm pretty sure he wasn't lying. So, but I did meet a guy who did play in them, according to him. And we're gonna not go to the other lists of counting stuff down, and we're not going to go back to the poems and lyrics this week. There's other, believe me, I got a bag full of them. We'll always save that for another time. I'm not likely to do a show next week unless one of my guys who do shows with me once in a while want to. They can contact me, Grigster, Creeper Freak. I'd be happy to, and find a late night when the kids are asleep. The kids are off next week for their spring break for a week, so doing a show with kids screaming and yelling in the microphone is not easy or fun. So I'm not likely to do a show next week, but I will be back like around the 10th of March or so. So Eddie G's Music World signing off. I hope you loved the background story of Heart. And for February 25th, 2019, thank you, and see you around soon.